is the Hyundai Ioniq 5, and it's one of the most striking vehicles I've ever seen. Now, it's Hyundai's all-new electric car, and not only does it look like it's been made from materials that have been mined from an asteroid, but it delivers an electric driving experience that, until now, you'd have to pay nearly £100,000 for. I have been desperate to drive this car, and today we're going to do just that. But before we go any further, if you like what you see, give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more awesome videos just like this one. I loved the look of this thing when I first saw it in the pictures, but you don't really know what you're in for until you see this in the metal, and I was really blown away. And I wasn't the only one, because wherever I go in this, it turns so many heads. The only thing that comes close to grabbing this much attention is like having a bright yellow supercar. And there's a very good reason for that, because just look at the thing. Not only do we have these ultra cool pixel lights, which you've got both at the front and at the rear of the car as well, but you also have a clamshell bonnet design, which, though is very, very simple in nature, has these really lovely creases down the side, which just gives the car so much definition. Further down, we've got this silver cladding around the side and down the skirts. Now, that's not going to be the case on every car, but it's just the version that we have spec'd here. It comes with the silver surrounds, and it looks fantastic. 20-inch wheels, which I think fits this car perfectly. I've not really got a bad thing to say about the way this thing looks. I just think it's absolutely staggering. And on the wheel arches, you also have these flicks, which I don't actually know if they provide any aerodynamic benefit, but it wouldn't surprise me if they do. But again, it's just a cool, neat little detail. Further back, we've got these two really defined creases in the bodywork, which I think works really well with the overall angular nature of this car. And you also have door handles that, while they're popping out at the moment, sit flush with the doors. The only negative aspect I'd say is that they kind of feel a little bit on the cheap side, but they still look very, very smart. And towards the rear of the car, we've got this nice, small little spoiler, and again, more LED tail lights integrated into the rear. And at the back, you can see these pixel lights even better, and it's no wonder people stare at this when you're out on the road. Ioniq 5 here in the middle of the panel, and while it looks like it would light up, it doesn't actually. The actual lights kind of go around here, but the rest here is just decorative. Now, when I first saw this car in pictures, I kind of thought it would be a bit more like a hatchback, but in reality, it's much more of an SUV. This thing sits at around the same size as something like a Tucson, which is a really quite big car. In fact, it's actually a little bit bigger than a VW ID4, and you can watch my review of that by clicking the link in the top right-hand corner. Now, what really makes this car stand out is the matte finish. Now, it's called Shooting Star Grey and comes in at £685, which is a lot of money, but in my opinion, it's totally worth it, because when you've got a car that looks this good, you really want to show off all the lines, and nothing does it better than this paint. One area where the Ioniq 5 has a real advantage against its rivals is with charging. Now, the Ioniq 5 is built on 800-volt electric architecture, which is the same as what you get on a Porsche Taycan and is almost unheard of at this end of the EV market. Now, what that means is that you can charge at speeds of up to 350 kilowatts. And while the chargers are really hard to find, if you do come across one, you'll be able to go from 10 to 80% battery in just 18 minutes. Now, another cool feature that you can get on the Ioniq 5 is something called V2L, which stands for Vehicle to Load. Now, what that means you can do is plug in this adapter here into the charging port, and on the other end is a 3-pin charger. So you could hook up anything from camping supplies to a flat screen TV and a gaming system, which is much more what I'd be into. Of course, there's no engine in the Ioniq 5, but I thought I would prop the bonnet open so at least you had something to look at. Now, there are 2 battery options available with 3 different powertrains. So it all starts off with a rear-wheel drive single motor producing 170 horsepower, and that's hooked up to a 58 kilowatt lithium-ion battery, and the two combined will give you a range of around 240 miles. Now, you can add a larger battery onto that of 73 kilowatt hours, which with the single motor, now getting a boost up to 217 horsepower, will get you around 300 miles of range. You can also get a dual motor all-wheel drive car, which produces 305 horsepower. But when combined with that larger battery, you actually take a slight dip to 287 miles of range. And as is the case with everything in life, the more power you have, the worse your range is. But anyway, what we do have to look at here is a small storage compartment which can be used to store your battery cables. Now, this is the rear-wheel drive car, so we get a little bit more space down here, but if you go for the all-wheel drive version, because there's a motor, it becomes less of a boot and more of a storage tray. But if you want more space, you need to go in the back. Now, our Ioniq 5 comes with a powered tailgate, and when it's open, it'll open up 540 litres of storage, which is actually bigger than what you get on a Ford Mustang Mach-E, which is a rival to the Ioniq 5, and it's about on par with the VW ID.4. But if boot space is your thing, you're going to want a Skoda Enyaq, and you can watch my review by clicking the link in the top right-hand corner. What I will say though is that a Skoda Enyaq doesn't look nearly as cool as an Ioniq 5, and we do have a lot of space back here. What's also cool is below the boot floor we have a bit more storage for the tyre repair kit, the 3-pin charger for home charging, and also somewhere to store the V2L charger. So while it's not the biggest boot out there, there's plenty of space back here for pretty much all your needs. Pricing for the Ioniq 5 starts at a very reasonable £37,000, but naturally that goes for the smaller battery and single motor option. If you want to go for the bigger battery, then you'll be paying between £45,000 and £49,000 depending on which motor configuration that you go for. Now, what I've been doing is having a look on the Yes Auto app, and there are already plenty of deals available for new and nearly new Ioniq 5s, so you don't have to go into an ultra long waiting list if you don't want to. As the Ioniq 5 is such a big car, it feels really spacious and airy in here. And that's because, well, it is. You see, this center console doesn't actually connect up with the dashboard, so it means that you have a lot more space between yourself and the passenger. But it's practical too. While we have a very minimalist center console design, the cup holders are exactly where you want them to be. And the armrest is plonked in the middle of the two seats. Below that is a large storage tray and a wireless phone charger, though there are a few USB ports if you want to physically plug something in. Our top-of-the-line Ultimate car comes with these very lovely and comfortable leather seats, and that contrasts nicely with these panels on the doors, which look as though they've been made of recycled materials. Hyundai has also tried to make a seamless vent system, which sort of works, and the overall quality of the plastics isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but they're not the nicest either and can feel a little bit cheap in some areas. Of course, what dominates the cabin though is this very large panel with two huge displays. Now, something interesting to note though is that you actually have a white bezel with white graphics, which is really different to what you get on pretty much any other car, which always goes for black panels and darker graphics for that more subtle look. It's a bit jarring at first, but it gives the car that really airy feel. Now, the infotainment system is very similar to what you get in other Hyundais today. It's dead simple to use and reacts really quickly, and it just feels very techy, and that's the kind of atmosphere that we're getting with the futuristic Ioniq 5. And that's partnered up with a new digital instrument cluster, which is tailored to the Ioniq 5 because we have things like battery readout as well as efficiency, and the graphics also change a little bit when you go into different driving modes. Handily though, there are a row of shortcut buttons below the infotainment screen, so if you're driving and you just want to quickly press a button, you can get to pretty much all the core menus using these physical buttons. We've also got a new steering wheel design with 2 spokes. It's lovely to hold, and you actually get these buttons which look like they're touch-sensitive haptic buttons like you get on the VW ID4, but they are actually physical buttons. And there are a couple of paddles behind the steering wheel for energy recovery under braking. Pretty much everything that you see in here comes as standard, so the only real differences between the different models are your self-driving features and also these leather seats which come with the ultimate car. Pretty much everything else comes as standard, so the Ioniq 5 is a really high-tech car for the money. I've got so much space in the back of the Ioniq 5 that it feels like I'm in a limousine rather than a family electric crossover SUV thing. Anyway, I mean, look at the amount of legroom that I've got. I can barely stretch to the back of the driver's seat, which is in my position. Now, I'm just under 6 foot, but even if you're a giant, you're still going to have plenty of legroom back here. And the same goes for headroom. I've got absolutely loads still to go, so if you're 6 foot and over, you'll be able to fit in the Ioniq 5, no problem whatsoever. Now, because we got the Ultimate, we've got the leather seats back here, which feel very comfortable indeed. A very basic armrest with a couple of cup holders. And when it comes to charging, on the surface, it looks like we just have a couple of USB ports, but there's actually an AC charger down here as well. So you could be on the go and charge up, I don't know, a Nintendo Switch or a laptop or whatever. Now, climate settings, there aren't actually any ways to increase or decrease the heat from back here, but you do have some vents on the side. So if you get a little bit chilly or a bit too hot, you can either open or close that off. The Ioniq 5 looks so quirky, you just want to jump in and see what it's like to drive. And now that I'm behind the wheel and I've spent a fair bit of time driving it, I can safely say it's very, very good and very, very easy to drive. So I'll go over what we're actually driving at the moment. It's the top spec model, the ultimate car. However, we don't have the all-wheel drive system, which is the most powerful model. Instead, we've got the rear-wheel drive motor with the larger capacity. And that means that technically we have the biggest range in this car with around 300 miles. But as is the case with all EVs, in the real world, when you've got the air conditioning on and you want to listen to the radio, you're gonna get closer to around 250, 260, which I still think is plenty. And speaking of plenty, I think that even having just 217 horsepower is perfectly fine for this. I've not felt like I've wanted the all-wheel drive car in the slightest, and a lot of the time I'm going around in eco mode because I'm wanting to save as much battery as possible, and I never really feel like I need to change into any of the other driving modes. And I find this is the same case pretty much with all electric cars. You get a lot that have these crazy 0 to 60 times, massive amounts of performance, but you're compromising quite a lot on range, whereas really the sweet spot for all cars is having the bigger battery and usually the entry-level or mid-spec motor system. But enough about performance in a car that is not really sporty in the slightest. What's the ride like? And admittedly, this is the area of where I feel as though the Ioniq 5 is the weakest. It's perfectly fine if you're on a motorway, it's nice and smooth, and most roads you're not really going to notice any issues with it. You'll find on certain roads with bumpy patches on them, the car can judder and shudder around a little bit. It just kind of makes it sound like there's a lot of weight, and it is a heavy car because it's an EV, and suspension doesn't really know how to properly handle it. So it almost sounds like the car is tripping over itself. And then there are other brakes which are nice and responsive, and you're not going to be flying through the window if you hit them a little bit too hard. What you can also do is change the regenerative braking using the paddles on the back of the steering wheel. So if you press on the left paddle, you'll get more regenerative braking, which is where the brakes are applied ever so slightly when you lift off the accelerator, and that puts energy back into the battery. It's not going to give you a full charge when you're driving along, but it just means that you can eke out a little bit more from your range. And then if I pull the right paddle, what that's going to do is reduce that effect. So if you're finding that you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable every time you lift off the accelerator and the brake supply, you can pull the right paddle and things will become a little bit more civilized. Now we've got Hyundai's full suite of semi-autonomous driving modes in the Ioniq 5, and that doesn't just include your standard lane keep assist and adaptive cruise control, but it'll also change lanes for you if it thinks the criteria has been met. What I will say though is that the system can get confused a little bit. So if you're driving along a road and you want to put in a bit more steering than the car offers, it'll get quite confused and you might find yourself having a little bit of a wobble. Just something to bear in mind if you're still a little skeptical about these semi-autonomous driver aids. What I find lets Hyundai's down a little bit today isn't the interior quality, which I think is really, really very good for what you're paying for, but it's actually the engines can feel a little bit under-refined compared to other rivals. But when you've got an electric car, you take that element away. So while the ride isn't quite up to par, could do a bit of work, the rest of this is absolutely staggering. I think it might be the best product Hyundai offers. And if it were my money and I had to choose between this and a Mustang Mach-E, and the Mach-E is a seriously good electric car, I think I'd go for the Hyundai. It really is that good. The Hyundai Ioniq 5 isn't just a great electric car, but I think it's one of the best new EVs of 2021. Sure, it's not perfect, but it's a serious statement of intent from Hyundai. And with looks like this, are we looking at a future classic, an electric future classic? Now, you can check out all things electric by heading over to yesauto.co.uk.